I think the biggest thing, one of the hardest challenges that we talk about on the podcast and that we hear from men all the time is going back to work after loss. Especially because as a man and in a COVID-based world where you're predominantly remote, these are topics, many times people may not even know that you were pregnant or that you had a loss. And as men, we're not walking around an office with a baby bump. And so there may not even be an acknowledgement or an understanding from colleagues and peers that you and your family were pregnant, let alone lost a child. Obviously, if it was a living child, which is another part of what we discuss, maybe that isn't as prevalent. But nevertheless, one of the biggest things that we've found, and I would say every single guest we've had on the podcast, every man that we've talked to just outside of it, every single one talks about the difficulty of going back to work, and they talk about how their employer responded. I've heard unbelievable stories about how employers were empathetic and emotional and supportive and giving time that is beyond what is typically allotted, stepping in to help. And my boss at my previous employer was exactly like that. I had meals being delivered from colleagues, and it was really beautiful. So employers can really be supportive. Because we've also heard from every single person that we talk to, the employers that are not, it causes permanent damage of that relationship between employee and employer. Most of these companies, I work in human resources, and most companies talk about how they put their employees first and they value their people. And in your employees' most challenging and darkest hour, if you're not there for them, that's an irreparable damage to that relationship. And most of those people that we've talked to that have found themselves not getting the support that they needed from their employer no longer work at that company. So my advice, not from a policy perspective or anything along those lines, is for bosses and on a macro level for companies and employers to really be conscious of loss at any level and what that does to your employees' emotional and mental well-being. And if you care about both of those things, you're going to do what you need to do to support them through that loss.